When we talk about human needs, we're not just talking about food, water, and shelter. We're talking about the emotional architecture that quietly shapes how we love, how we work, how we cope, and ultimately, how we live. And at the very base of that architecture is something deceptively simple, yet profoundly influential: our need for certainty. Certainty is the psychological oxygen we're all unconsciously breathing. It's the thing that makes us feel safe, grounded, and in control. It's the internal voice that says, "I know what to expect," and in that knowing, we find a momentary sense of peace. This need can look like financial security, routine, a predictable partner, or even just the comfort of a daily ritual. It's why we check our phones constantly, why we revisit the same shows, reread the same texts, go back to the same relationships even when they no longer serve us. Familiar pain, after all, often feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. Think about how much energy we spend trying to create certainty in a world that's constantly shifting. We overanalyze texts. We try to predict how someone feels based on tiny behavioral clues. We delay decisions because we can't control the outcome. We tell ourselves stories, sometimes inaccurate ones, just to reduce the discomfort of not knowing. But here's the truth. When certainty becomes a compulsion rather than a need, it turns into a prison. This is where the psychological trap reveals itself. The pursuit of certainty can feel rational, like we're being careful or wise. But in reality, it often masks fear: fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of failure, and fear, when it's allowed to run the show, doesn't guide us, it confines us. It tells us to stay small, stay predictable, stay safe, even if what's safe is also what's slowly killing our spirit. Certainty is also one of the primary reasons people settle, not because they're lazy, not because they lack ambition, but because the brain, specifically the amygdala, is wired to prioritize the known over the unknown. In evolutionary terms, certainty once meant survival. If you could predict where danger was, you stayed alive. But in modern life, that wiring often works against us. The job you hate, the relationship that drains you, the lifestyle that numbs you. These might feel certain, but they aren't fulfilling. And yet, people stay, not because it's better, but because it's known. Now here's where it gets even more complex. We often confuse control with certainty. We think that if we can control a person, an outcome, or a situation, we can create emotional stability. But control is an illusion. The more we grip, the more life resists. The tighter we hold onto something, the more fragile it becomes. You can't force certainty out of life without losing connection to reality. True peace doesn't come from controlling what's outside. It comes from regulating what's within. What's even more fascinating is how people's strategies for meeting this need vary. Some micromanage their lives to death. Everything is planned, labeled, structured. Others meet the need for certainty by numbing out distraction becomes the drug of choice. Scrolling, binging, isolating. Anything that gives a sense of predictable escape. But neither approach creates sustainable peace. They simply create the illusion of it. The irony is, the more we chase certainty, the more anxious we often become. Why? Because life refuses to give us guarantees. And the more we demand them, the more fragile our emotional world becomes. A single change, a breakup, a job loss, a betrayal, can send someone spiraling if their emotional equilibrium is built entirely on predictability. But when you learn to build internal certainty, a calm, grounded sense of who you are, what you value, and what you can handle, you stop needing external life to always cooperate. So how do we meet the need for certainty in a healthy way? Through self-trust, through emotional resilience, through creating rituals that nourish us without making us rigid, through relationships that are steady but not controlling, through beliefs that root us but don't trap us, and most of all, through accepting that life will always contain a degree of uncertainty and making peace with that instead of fighting it. You see, certainty isn't about knowing the future. It's about knowing yourself in the face of it. When you can stand in the unknown with clarity, grace, and courage, then you're no longer a slave to predictability. You're free, and maybe that's the paradox we all have to embrace. That true certainty doesn't come from making life predictable, it comes from making ourselves unshakable. If certainty gives us the ground beneath our feet, variety is the wind that keeps us moving forward. As much as we long for the comfort of the known, we are equally wired to crave the unknown. That tension, that beautiful, frustrating dance between predictability and surprise, is what makes life rich. Variety is the energy that keeps us engaged. It's the excitement of spontaneity, the thrill of a new challenge, the rush of the unexpected. Without it, even the most stable life starts to feel like a cage. You've probably felt it before, that moment when everything seems fine on paper. You have the routine, the job, the relationship. Things are steady, and yet something inside you feels numb, restless, bored, and you start wondering, what's wrong with me? The answer isn't that something is wrong with you. It's that you're human, and humans are not built to live on autopilot. What makes this even more interesting is how subtly the need for variety shows up. It doesn't always arrive like a midlife crisis or a radical life shift. Often, it's quiet, a sudden craving to try a new hobby, an itch to travel, a temptation to text someone you shouldn't, a growing resentment of the monotony around you. Variety isn't always loud, but its absence is deafening. And when this need isn't met in healthy ways, people will find unhealthy ways to meet it. That's the turning point where relationships break down, where people cheat, where addiction takes hold, where self-sabotage creeps in, not because people want to destroy what they have, but because they can no longer tolerate the dull ache of emotional repetition. This is where emotional intelligence becomes essential, because the more unconscious we are of our need for variety, the more it will control us from the shadows. We tend to vilify this need. Society praises consistency, commitment, reliability, and rightly so. But we forget that without novelty, those things turn stagnant. Variety is what makes long-term love exciting. It's what makes a career worth pursuing instead of tolerating. It's what turns routine into rhythm. And here's the psychological nuance. The need for variety isn't in conflict with stability. It's what revitalizes it. In relationships, for example, people often assume that commitment kills passion. But that's only true when people stop bringing newness into the bond. It's not the time that ruins intimacy, it's the lack of emotional adventure. People stop being curious about each other. They stop asking questions. They stop playing. They stop surprising. And the relationship dies, not from conflict, but from predictability. The same goes for personal growth. Growth is impossible without change, and change is the essence of variety. Every time you step outside your comfort zone, every time you do something unfamiliar, you're not just meeting a need. You're expanding your identity. You're telling your brain, I can handle the unknown, and that's where confidence is built, not in control, but in flexibility, not in repetition, but in risk. Now let's be clear, not all variety is good. Chasing chaos for the sake of stimulation can become destructive. That's why the goal isn't just to seek novelty, but to curate it, to introduce healthy doses of variety into your life in ways that don't uproot your foundations. Learn a new skill, say yes to a spontaneous trip, switch up your daily routine, change how you communicate in your relationship. The smallest adjustments can reignite energy in the most routine areas of life. And here's where it becomes personal, because everyone meets this need differently. For some, variety means excitement and adrenaline. For others, it means emotional depth, intellectual stimulation, or creative expression. The key is to know yourself well enough to understand what kind of variety energizes you, and what kind of variety simply distracts you. This is where real maturity begins, when you can meet your need for novelty without destroying your stability, when you can bring surprise into a relationship without threatening the trust, when you can reinvent yourself without needing to escape yourself. That's not just balance, that's mastery. So many people live half alive because they confuse safety with fulfillment. They stop taking risks. They silence their curiosity. They settle into lives that look stable but feel empty. And the tragedy isn't that they stayed, it's that they stopped exploring. Because in the end, it's not just about surviving life. It's about feeling alive in it. And variety, when chosen consciously, is the heartbeat of that aliveness. If certainty is the foundation and variety is the energy, then significance is the architecture of identity. It's the deep, almost primal need to know that we matter, to someone, to something, to ourselves. Significance isn't about ego in the shallow sense. It's about meaning. It's about believing that who we are and what we do carries weight in the world. Without that, no amount of comfort or excitement can fill the void. You see this need surface in so many ways. Some chase significance through success, career titles, awards, money, the kind of attention that makes them feel important in the eyes of others. Others seek it in their relationships, trying to be indispensable to someone, hoping that being needed will translate to being worthy. And some, heartbreakingly, pursue it in darker places. If they can't feel admired, they settle for being feared. If they can't be loved, they provoke chaos, because in their mind being rejected is painful, but being invisible is unbearable. At its core, significance is about visibility, not just being seen, but being seen as different, special, essential. It's not enough to just exist. We want to feel like our presence changes the atmosphere. And when that need isn't met in healthy ways, people will unconsciously distort themselves to get it. That's how you end up with perfectionism, martyrdom, attention seeking, or emotional withdrawal. People manipulate how they show up not because they're fake, but because they're terrified that their real self might not be enough to matter. And that fear often begins early. Many of us were raised to equate value with performance. Be the best. Be useful. Be strong. Don't be too emotional, too needy, too slow. Over time, we learn to earn love, not receive it. And we carried that performance mindset into adulthood, into our relationships, our careers, our social media presence. We built significance on fragile platforms, always needing more applause to feel okay. But here's the problem. If your worth is based on external validation, you're never really free. You're just leasing your identity from other people's approval. That's why so many people feel anxious even when they're achieving. Because deep down, they know the version of themselves they're projecting isn't whole. It's curated, it's strategic, and it's exhausting. You can be successful and still feel deeply insecure if your sense of significance is conditional. Because significance that must constantly be proven is never truly felt. This is where the deeper psychological shift needs to happen. Significance isn't something you achieve, it's something you anchor. It starts by detaching your value from your output. You're not more worthy because you're busier. You're not more lovable because you're more impressive. You're not more important because you're more admired. True significance comes from the courage to show up as your full self, even when it's not perfectly polished. It's also about purpose. When people lose their sense of purpose, they don't just feel lost, they feel irrelevant. That's when depression creeps in, not because life is hard, but because it feels meaningless. When someone can't answer the question, "Why am I here?" they start to drift. Purpose doesn't always look grand. Sometimes it's found in the quiet ways you impact others, the way you show up, the way you listen, the way you make someone feel seen in a world that constantly overlooks. That's also why contribution is so powerful. When you shift the focus from "how can I stand out" to "how can I serve," you start to experience a different kind of significance. One that isn't built on ego, but on impact. When you help someone, even in a small way, you're reminded that your existence has ripple effects. And those ripples are what give life depth. But to contribute authentically, you have to first believe that who you are is enough. That your voice is worth hearing, that your story is worth telling, that your presence carries meaning even when no one's clapping. And that's the real breakthrough, when your sense of significance stops being dependent on what the world gives you and starts being rooted in what you give to it. Because the truth is, there will always be someone richer, smarter, better looking, more followed, but no one else can be you. Your combination of thoughts, experiences, insights, and soul, it's unrepeatable, and when you fully own that, you no longer chase significance. You embody it. So the question isn't, "Do I matter?" The question is, "Am I showing up like someone who already does?" Because the moment you believe you matter, the world starts to respond like you do. If certainty gives us safety, variety gives us excitement, and significance gives us a sense of worth, then connection is what gives life its soul. Of all the human needs, this one is the most essential, and yet, ironically, it's also the one most people are afraid of. We live in a world that celebrates independence, strength, and self-reliance, and while those are important virtues, we sometimes forget that no matter how strong we are, we're still wired for connection, not just companionship, not just attention, but deep, emotional, soul-level connection. It's the need to be seen and accepted, not just for the curated version of ourselves, but for the messy, insecure, vulnerable truth that lives behind our masks. And when that need goes unmet, people don't just feel lonely, they start to feel invisible. And invisibility isn't the absence of company, it's the absence of emotional resonance. It's being around people but not being known by them, and for many, that quiet ache becomes unbearable. What's complicated about this need is how many defenses we build around it. People push love away while secretly craving it. They act aloof while hoping someone fights for them. They pretend not to care when they care deeply. That's because connection isn't just beautiful, it's terrifying. To connect is to risk. Risk rejection. Risk abandonment. Risk being hurt again in the same place where you've been hurt before. So people armor up. They call it standards or independence or not needing anyone, but often it's just fear in a better outfit. We develop attachment styles not to thrive, but to survive. Avoidant, anxious, disorganized. All strategies born from trying to meet the need for connection in environments where it felt inconsistent, conditional, or unsafe. And as adults, we don't outgrow those strategies, we refine them. We use intellect, humor, success, or silence as shields. Not because we're cold, but because we've been burned. But the truth is, connection can't happen through performance. It happens through presence, through letting someone see the parts of you that aren't filtered, fixed, or edited. The ones that don't always have the right words, the ones that say, "This is who I am underneath it all. Do you still want to stay?" And that kind of emotional exposure is terrifying precisely because it's so powerful. Because if someone can connect to those parts, you finally feel seen in a way that touches something ancient in you. But if they can't or won't, you feel rejected at your core. And that's a level of pain many people are unwilling to risk again. So we settle for shallow relationships, for polite conversations, for performative closeness, all while telling ourselves we're just not that emotional or too busy for all that. But beneath the noise, the craving remains, because no career, no possession, no number of followers can replicate the warmth of genuine human closeness. The kind where silence feels safe and presence feels healing. What we often forget is that connection isn't something we wait for. It's something we create. Through courage, through intentionality, through being the one who reaches out, who listens without distraction, who asks the real questions and stays for the real answers. And that doesn't mean oversharing or demanding vulnerability from others. It means living from a place where your inner world is open, not perfectly healed, but available. It means being willing to say, "This is what I feel," even when your voice shakes, because someone has to go first. Someone has to create the space where connection becomes possible. This is also where self-connection becomes non-negotiable. You cannot connect with someone else in a healthy way if you're emotionally disconnected from yourself. If you don't know your own needs, your own fears, your own desires, you'll either demand that someone else define you or expect them to constantly validate you. And that's not connection. That's emotional dependency. True connection begins when you meet yourself fully, when your relationship with your inner world becomes so honest that it invites honesty in others. In the end, the most powerful relationships, romantic or otherwise, aren't built on chemistry alone. They're built on truth, on shared values, on emotional availability, on showing up not just to be loved, but to love. On the willingness to see and be seen, not just on your best days, but especially on your worst ones. Because connection is not about perfection, it's about presence. It's not about being everything someone else needs, it's about being real enough for them to trust you with who they are. And maybe that's what we all need to remember, that in a world full of noise and performance, the most radical thing you can offer is your real self, and the most healing thing you can receive is someone else's